The last thing I'll say on AI getting rid of your job is that if AI can automate your job completely, you're probably not doing very challenging work for yourself. I'm not saying it's not hard, I'm saying it's not challenging. And if that's the reality of where you're working, you're not going to be satisfied long-term in that job anyways. And so while this is something people don't like to hear, and it's something I don't like to say very often, a lot of the time layoffs or being automated out of a job and fired are actually very good things. If you are willing to learn from them, invest in yourself, and get to the next level. I have had people who were working with me in coaching who've been laid off, who were unbelievably upset at the time, only to 3 months later look back and be like, this was the best thing that could have happened to me. That job was awful, right? Or people who were automated out of jobs who then go, well, now I know how to think strategically. I know how to automate. I know how to look for new opportunities. And so now I've grown and I'm ready for that next level of leadership. And they get promoted in their next job really quickly. Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Today's topic has been highly requested in a lot of my Instagram lives, in my comments. I see people talking about it all over the internet. So of course I have to weigh in. Today we are talking about how will AI affect jobs and the economy. So a little bit of my personal background to set the stage for this conversation. So I have been in the technology space for the last 9 years. Before that, I was in data science and in financial analytics. So I've spent a majority of my career in some version of data work. And I've worked for some of the largest companies in the world that were really at the forefront of AI and technology and development. And I've also worked for really small companies that were doing really cool, interesting automating things just in order to survive with their smaller capacity. So I have a pretty broad scope of knowledge of how this works. I've also worked with many clients who are specifically in the AI space or who are adjacent to it. So I'm going to share a couple of my thoughts related to AI, the job market, some of the common narratives that I'm seeing online, and some of the not so common narratives that I think we should be talking about more when it comes to AI. So we're going to talk first with something that I think is really applicable for most people, ChatGPT. So if you've ever used ChatGPT, it is incredibly well-versed in what exists on the internet. It is a great tool for input and output reciprocation. But what it requires is a person to tell it what to do. So if you go to ChatGPT, you can't just go and get what you want. You have to say, hey, given these parameters, given this information, how would you do XYZ? Or, hey, I want to write a paper. I want to reference these sources and I don't want it to be plagiarized. You have to give it instructions. Now, where we've come in the last 10 years for how that AI responds to those instructions is pretty amazing, right? It's pretty incredible. So there's definitely that potential for automation to get rid of a lot of parts of jobs. And we're going to talk about that more as the episode progresses. But right now, where we sit with AI, at least what is public AI knowledge, we'll have a separate conversation about that as well, you still require human interaction. And so we're going to talk a lot about what does that look like, who are the major players, and what does that mean for you and your career. So first off, if you don't know, Microsoft is the minority shareholder in every major AI company. So for many, they are owned 49% by Microsoft. I will let you interpret that as you will, as for why Microsoft would want to only be 49% owner of most of these companies. But clearly, they have a really big stake in what's happening. If you follow technology news at all, you also probably heard that the individuals who were working on AI for Meta, many of them jumped ship after they built the AI, saying they didn't want to be associated with it. Interesting. The same is true of a bunch of people at Amazon who has been focused on the cloud AI portions of their business, stepping back and saying like, hey, this could be dangerous, right? So I think there's some positive and some negatives of AI. I think a lot of it depends on intent, utilization, investment, how we're going to scale things like that. So what is AI? Why is it important? How is it going to impact your job? So AI is really a fancy, terrifying way to say we wrote some really complicated code. Okay. I'm going to simplify it down to that. In the end, similar to any code that runs to load your internet browser, your Facebook feed, that is analyzing, large data sets in Hadoop, all of those come down to code written. Where AI starts to differ is the goal of AI is that it would be a learning code, meaning that it is going to write itself as it learns more information. That's the intent. It's the long-term intent of AI. For things that we've seen in the public domain, AI is not quite there yet in the public domain. I can't speak to what's happening on behind government closed doors or company closed doors where AI is that is not made visible to the public. But what I can tell you is that the ability of the individuals who are writing this code has incredibly grown over the last 20 years. If you have anything to do with technology, the way that we used to write code is very basic, very simple, very logically statement oriented, meaning you wrote a logical statement that repeated in the back end of the code. Now what's happening in a lot of this code is we're writing very complex decisioning trees as opposed to logical statements, meaning that we are following lots of different logical processes embedded in one another to create certain outcomes. It's why ChatGPT is so interesting to a majority of the population who's not in technology, because we can go to it and say, hey, I want to know the top 10 most viral topics for social media videos, and it will analyze the data that exists and produce a top 10 list. But what it's given in the back end is decision trees of what type of question is it? What would be the sources? How do I access the sources of that data? Then what do I do with that data in order to answer the query? It's got a lot of different decisions that it's making on the back end. So that's the part that's really complex about AI. I think a lot of CEOs right now are very like, we're investing in AI, we're investing in blockchain. They have all these things that are very, I think, popular headlines. But the reality is that like most companies are not there yet, right? Even in very advanced technology organizations that I've worked at, we refer to a lot of things as AI, but most people are not producing true AI output. We're just, as a society, not quite there as a skill level yet. But obviously, we're getting closer, right? Deepfakes have become incredibly popular. There was a bank in Hong Kong recently where an individual called in. He was faced with a deep fake of his CFO and many other members of staff, but didn't know it. CFO asked for him to wire money, and he did. Then it turns out that the 9 people on this call, other than him, were not real. How do we hold the employee accountable for that, right? So there's definitely some things happening. Things are changing. But what really everybody wants to know is like, is AI going to automate my job? So there's a few things that AI cannot do and will not ever be able to do. And we're going to talk about the limitations of AI quickly because I think that's really important. So first off, AI will never be a person. It will never empathize like a person. It will never feel pain like a person. It will never have the emotional capacity to understand nuance that a person does. AI is not built to replicate the emotional interpersonal side of humanity. We can write code to get close. If you ever saw, what is it? I Am Legend. Is that it? With Will Smith? Anyways, we're going to get back to that. But you can be thought to think in patterns similar to a human, but AI is never going to be there. So when you think of jobs that are very human-centric, we're never going to get to a point where those are completely eliminated, because in the end, somebody's going to want to talk to a person. Somebody's going to want to face off with a person. Now, what this means is there's going to be a shift ironically, towards some services, some being key here. So there's an article by Nexford University, and it talks about what jobs are going to be automated. All right. And it talks about a customer service representative. It says you're going to call in and they're not going to need a person to work at the bank because customer service is going to be completely automated and AI is going to know how to help all of your problems. Well, if you've called any customer service line in the last 10 years, we ain't there yet, right? So everybody that I know goes immediately customer service, customer service, customer service, because we want to get past the machine to a person. So while I do think there's going to be components of, telephony type roles that will be automated, you will always need a human to face off with emotional humans, right? So there will always be a component of this that still exists, even if it's automated. Receptionist is another one, right? They can understand you, they can talk to you, they can book you a room, they can call whoever you need. Again, at some point, you're going to have an old school leader who wants to outsource his tasks to another person. So there'll be partial automation and there'll be partial people. Now, what do both of these examples mean? It means a decrease in the workforce. You won't need as many customer service representatives because 60%, 70% of the questions are being answered by AI, and you only need enough reps for 30%. Whereas 20 years ago, you needed reps for 100%, right? Even at this stage, most companies are somewhere in like a 30, 70, maybe 40, 60 range, where we are automating as much as we can in telephony systems and then routing to people for escalations. That's going to continue. So if you woke up this morning and you're like, my goal in life is to answer phones and be a customer service rep, you have to be the best, right? There will still be jobs for this, but you're going to have to be the best. Same is true of receptionists. Same is going to be true of assistants, right? So some of these jobs will be automated to an extent, but what they won't be able to do is replace the person. What I think is really interesting in this article is the next one is salespeople. And I actually very much disagree with this. I don't think you replace salespeople ever. Because when we buy something, we buy it because we like the person who's selling it to us most of the time. Okay. Otherwise, influencers would not exist. Influencers exist because we want to see somebody who maybe looks like us, dresses like us, talks like us, or does those things like the person we want to be. And we buy it to be closer to that person. We don't buy it because we're like, man, I have been looking for a motion sensor light for the last 6 weeks. I'm so glad Susie put one on her Amazon Instagram. No, that's not what we did. What happens is we see them, we're like, oh, do I need a motion sensor light? Right? We get sold through people. So I actually very much disagree with this one. I think fulfillment of a sale, right? The ability to select your product, buy your product, fulfill your product, that AI. But the face-to-face, people like to work with a person. And I'm going to give you another example of a role that I think is actually going to boom in the AI is all types of servicing, coaching, guidance. I'm not saying this because I am a coach. Career coaching, we could talk about totally separate. But I'll give an example of 10 years ago, if you heard that somebody had a personal stylist, you assumed they were really wealthy. They had a lot of money. They were able to pay somebody to buy them clothes. Like, oh my gosh, they must be famous, right? And now we see a lot more stylists on social media who have affordable packages, right? $250 to curate your closet or $100 for 15 different looks. Things like that, where now what was previously inaccessible from a price point perspective is now accessible to the individual. But I don't want AI to tell me what to wear. I want Susie, whose style I think is really cool, to tell me what to wear. So I do think a lot of these service industries, especially things that were previously luxury that are now being made more affordable, I think especially in the short term, we're actually going to see a really big boom of those types of jobs, whether entrepreneurial or through a company. Career coaching would be another example where when I was first in corporate, only C-suite worked with leadership coaches or career coaches. Like that wasn't a common thing at the other levels of seniority. But now lots of people work with coaches. Lots of people have access because the price point has decreased to a way that is more affordable. And the ability to find these people through social media as courtesy of AI is actually growing. And so I do think luxury services made affordable is going to see a big boom. So if you're the type of person who's thinking, well, I could do that, like this is the time. because that's actually going to pick up speed as opposed to get automated. One of the other areas that I think is going to boom as a result of AI is cybersecurity. Okay. Previously, cybersecurity has existed to fight off people. We think like people, we operate like people, but now we have cybersecurity teams that are building prevention of AI involvement. This is like an incredibly new area. It is really, really fascinating. I work with a lot of cybersecurity individuals, and you now have to be able to build code that will prevent code from accessing your code to get information about your people, right? This is like Mad Max, the code edition, right? So we're coming up with all of these ways to prevent these algorithms, these AI from getting access to the information they cannot get access to for our personal companies. We used to be able to handle that primarily with like tokenization and some minimal firewall security. Now you're talking huge cybersecurity builds. So if you're in the development industry, engineering industry, you have concerns about AI, get a cybersecurity certification. That is like a huge area that is booming and will continue to boom for the foreseeable future, because the better AI gets, the more cybersecurity you need. So there's always going to be a balance between those two. I would say engineering, development, and building of AI is also an area that's going to boom, right? So that is something that the computer cannot code itself. Even if we were to get there, we're talking decades from now, you will always need somebody to code the first time, to think about the problem statement, solve the problem statement with code. And whether that's inputting into an AI machine that generates the code or that's writing the code themselves, I do think development and engineering is still very safe for the foreseeable future. So I do think it's interesting. We hear a lot about like AI is going to steal my job. I think that's very possible if you are in an easily automated job. That is true. McDonald's is my example for this. I remember, I'm older. I remember when in the 90s, McDonald's did this huge thing trying to argue against minimum wage increases. And at the time, minimum wage, I want to say, was like $3 and something. And they wanted to take it to $5. And McDonald's threw this huge fit. Anywho, basically McDonald's was like, we don't want to pay $5 an hour for our people. Now we think like, oh my gosh, how could they even afford like shoes with $5 an hour? And so what did they do? They started investing in AI. They started investing in kiosks, right? The touch screens now that all the McDonald's have where you can place their orders. They started building robots to work in the kitchen to automate some of the cooking. And now I think we look back and people get frustrated because they're like, but I want to talk to a person. I want to order from a person, but I have to order on a screen because the minimum wage has gotten so high. So that's an example of a very automatable job. They're picking from a selection on a menu. There are limited modifications that can be made. The system has all that information. You can teach a person or a screen to do that for you, right? That is an example of an easily automated job, which is why they have gone that route. Now, there are lots of jobs that are not easily automated. Managing people is a great example. You can't have a robot managing people. It doesn't work, right? Again, we don't have that EQ piece. And so higher levels of seniority tend to be safer from AI than more junior levels of seniority. You will always want a CEO to direct a company. You wouldn't want a robot to direct a company. But the automated roles within that company will be automated, right? Those repeatable BAU type roles. So if you want to be really valuable in the corporate society right now, there are certain parts of work that you could do, right? Advertising kind of requires a person still. Cybersecurity, development and engineering, even data analysis to an extent. I know that a lot of analysis is being automated with AI, but again, we have to feed the right information into the machine. So I think there's still a possibility there. So there's some of those roles that I think are still really booming. They're still really strong. But then I think the flip side, the person who's keying in manual data, your job is not secure. The person who is answering check deposit calls in the customer service, your job is not secure, right? Those repeatable tasks, it would be easier to train a system. Those are going to go first. So if you find yourself in that position, the next question is like, what do we do about this? Right? So first, I am not a huge fan of master's degrees. I say this on a lot of episodes. People give me a lot of hate. I think there are very specific reasons to get a master's degree. One, you've taken a very long break, you're coming back to the workforce. Two, you're making a big switch in your career, and that degree very specifically sets you up for success in that situation. Or three, you want to be a C-suite. Or four, you really like to learn and you're not actually looking for a return on investment. If you fall into one of those four categories, go get your master's. Great. Everybody else, I'm going to say get certifications. You're going to get certifications. Google has some pretty great ones. Coursera has some pretty great ones. AWS has great ones. Salesforce has great ones. Get certifications that are going to make you valuable. They're going to make you marketable. And then find ways to apply them, right? Find projects within your current company where you can use that new certification. So say you are in customer service, since that's been our example. Say you're in customer service, you're answering the phones, you're like, this is not going to work. And you get certified in AWS. All right. Odds are most customer service reps are not coding in AWS. Seems uncommon, right? You're going to network with people in technology. You're going to meet people on your cloud team. Every company on the planet should have a cloud team at this point. You're going to get to know them. You're going to figure out how you get access to data. And you're going to start working in AWS to get informations for your calls, right? Can I write some code that would allow me to get the information I need about my client faster so I don't have to use the really slow UI? You're going to start building those use cases because then you can pepper those on your resume and you can use them to advocate for yourself for a promotion because you're operating at a different level. You're using a new skill set. That's going to help you get promoted as well. So it serves two purposes. And then it allows you to long-term transition into a role that's more familiar with that. Where people make a big mistake when they get certifications is they don't apply them. They get the certification and they expect that that's going to be enough to help them land a new job in that certification area. And it won't. You need to show that you can apply what you've learned first. Easiest ways to do that are internally where you're at, either in your current role or with an internal transfer. Then try and make an external jump. So we want to really focus on getting certifications. You could also do a career change, right? Like I said, anything that is a people role will not be automated, right? That includes lawyers. That includes teachers. That includes senior leadership, directors, CEOs. That includes people in HR who are the people. It would include doctors, psychologists, therapists, things like that. Those jobs are never going away. So you could always make a transition into one of those. So these are kind of some of the options if you see AI heading your way. Now, something that I will caution people with in this conversation is we have a tendency as people to fear the loss of job, right? We don't want to lose our job to somebody else. It's a big stress of ours. But the reality is if you're constantly automating your job before the company can, and you're looking for new opportunities to automate and to problem solve to get to that next level, you will progress your career faster rather than watching your job get automated by somebody else and then eliminated. So if you have to pick between those two paths, you always want to be thinking of what is the next level for me? How do I upskill my team? How do I automate parts of my job so I can go do cool other things? But you also have to have visibility and insight into what are those next things. I have an individual who works for me really great. We've worked together before, recently recruited back to work for me again. And he is excellent at automation. So excellent, in fact, he has automated himself out of his last 3 jobs. Now, the difference in my team is I have visibility into 6 years from now. We could be automating everything we're doing, and I still have a roadmap that would work. But he needs to build that skill so that this doesn't repeat under different leaders, right? He needs to be able to see that visibility and that strategy, and that's his growth opportunity. And so when you think of automating your job, you're also thinking of what's next and how do you get there? And that can be in partnership with your leadership, in partnership with your boss, but you don't want to hold yourself back. The last thing I'll say on AI getting rid of your job is that if AI can automate your job completely, you're probably not doing very challenging work for yourself. I'm not saying it's not hard, I'm saying it's not challenging. And if that's the reality of where you're working, you're not going to be satisfied long-term in that job anyways. And so while this is something people don't like to hear, and it's something I don't like to say very often, a lot of the time layoffs or being automated out of a job and fired are actually very good things if you are willing to learn from them, invest in yourself, and get to the next level. I have had people who were working with me in coaching who've been laid off, who were unbelievably upset at the time, only to 3 months later look back and be like, this was the best thing that could have happened to me. That job was awful, right? Or people who were automated out of jobs who then go, well, now I know how to think strategically. I know how to automate. I know how to look for new opportunities. And so now I've grown and I'm ready for that next level of leadership. And they get promoted in their next job really quickly. As long as you are willing to invest in yourself and grow, being automated out of a job is not a bad thing. It can be a bad thing if you only know how to do that and you're not willing to learn how to do anything else. Don't let yourself be in that position. So AI is a very interesting topic. We've talked a little bit about what it is, who are the major players, and by major players, I mean primarily Microsoft. Talked a little bit about jobs I think are going to be eliminated as a result of AI, as well as what jobs I think are going to boom as a result of AI. I've also talked about how to make a career shift. If you find yourself in one of those positions that is going to be eliminated, how do you get out of it quickly? So the last thing that I want to talk about on today's episode is I want to talk about some of the coolest things AI is doing. In Kendall's personal opinion, what are some of the coolest things that are happening in the world of AI right now? So the first one is obviously like the ChatGPT input-output type models, I think are helping us communicate much more effectively. So I have a lot of clients who have used ChatGPT recently to help write their year-end performance reviews, to help figure out how to give their boss feedback, to help figure out how to give their employees feedback. And you can even type things into ChatGPT like, this person's opportunity is communicating more effectively. These are 2 examples. How do I say that to them in a nice way in a performance review? And it will spit out language to help you. Now, proofread it. It's not always perfect. Proofread it. Make it sound like you. But I do think it's really helping us communicate better in the corporate world. The other thing that I think it is both helping and hurting, so we'll talk about both sides, is plagiarism. So I actually saw this on, I think, BBC when I was in Europe last summer, talking about how AI has no choice but to plagiarize artists because the only art it can create is art referenced from other artists. And so it is like a plagiarism tool. Obviously, that is a negative. We want the individuals who make their work to get credit for the work that they get. But the flip side of this is I remember in school getting in trouble if you didn't cite something correctly, right? Maybe I'm old, but like MLA citation of references. And now you could go to ChatGPT and paste in a paragraph, and I'm helping people cheat on their papers right now, and say, write a 10,000 word essay on this topic without plagiarizing by referencing these 3 sources. And it will do it, which I think is kind of cool. I did see an article yesterday that I thought was pretty funny that said teachers are using AI to grade the homework that children are using AI to complete. I don't know that that's great for our just like long-term retention of information, our ability to think critically, I'll be honest. But I do think it's an interesting aspect of AI that is starting to kind of come to life. One of the other cool things that I think AI allows us to do is prevent certain mistakes. So I have a client who works on a very interesting AI product, and I don't want to get too specific. But their product essentially is related to cooking, and it helps you cook things perfectly every time. And I think that's really cool for the huge majority of the population who doesn't know how to cook, right? Who doesn't know how to make sure something doesn't burn in the oven, doesn't know how to boil water for mac and cheese. If you could just tell your machine to do it, I think that that is a very interesting upskill. I think also it helps decrease cost, which makes it more available to huge percentages of the population that right now don't have access to food because of high food and cooking costs. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of it. I'm a huge foodie. So for me, maybe it doesn't add so much value. And quick aside, I was laughing with my husband because I cook on smell. I'm like somebody's old Italian grandmother. I know when it's ready, when it smells ready. And the oven that we have in our house, you actually can't smell anything. And it really stresses me out. And I'll have to like open my oven to know if things are done so that I can smell it and see if it's right. Fun fact. Okay. But I think AI is it's making some things accessible in a new way, which I think is really interesting. The other cool thing that I think AI is doing is in relation to socials. So we could have a whole separate episode on the studies of social media. Lots of studies have shown that social media actually does not give us the connection that we require face to face. It doesn't fill that same part of like our brain's void. But what I do think is very interesting about AI and algorithms is it can point you to a lot of people who are doing things you like to do or want to do. And it can connect us in new ways. This kind of goes back to that luxury services comment from earlier on in the episode, because what we previously didn't know how to find, the algorithm can now bring to us. Right. And I saw an interesting study last year said more young people use TikTok to find things than Google. Like, so things that previously would have been Googled to say, hey, Google, what's the best restaurant in Dallas? We would now go to TikTok and say restaurants in Dallas and see what comes up there. And I do think that's really interesting evolution because algorithms have become so much more advanced. They will bring us information that's so much more applicable. And so even in my business, lots of people will be looking for corporate or for humor or for something relatable, and they find my coaching. And so that's a lot of my connectivity. It's also how I find most of my services: the person who built my website, the person who built my funnels, the person who is helping me restyle my wardrobe. Like, all of these people are people I found on social media through searches. And I think it's a really great way to bring people together for services. There's a book I read that talked about the height of human connection is being able to outsource what you are not good at and supply what you are. And I think that in an entrepreneurial mindset, that's easier to equate to say like, hey, I'm providing career coaching, they're providing me other services, and that's that trade. But even in the corporate world, the service that you provide for your company is the skill that you are best at. It adds value. If it's something that's challenging you and you're really good at, odds are it's not going to be automated by AI anyways. And then in return, we receive these services from our company. We receive pay and healthcare and these other things that are not our specialty. We don't know how to do or we don't want to do. And so I do think that give and take, AI actually exacerbates that as opposed to shrinks it, because AI can't do those things for us a lot of the time, but it can connect us with people who can really well. So I hope you guys found this episode interesting. This is a little different than the content that we normally talk about, but obviously it does have a huge impact on our careers and our corporate success long term. If you'd like to see more episodes like this coming out, please feel free to comment below. Maybe we can get in some experts to talk about it from their point of view. And if you like today's episode, please give us 5 stars wherever you are at and write a quick little review. We would appreciate it. Otherwise, be sure to tune into next week's episode.